Assalamu alaikum. This is Aisha Abid from Army Public School and College, Khanewal. Today, I welcome you all in our biology lesson for grade 9th. It is a project of APSEC's online support program. Today, our topic will be anaerobic respiration. Subtopics will be types of fermentation. Objective, we will be able to understand anaerobic respiration and its types, which are lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. Success criteria, concepts must be clear about anaerobic respiration and its types. Today is day 2 of week 4th. So before starting our topic of anaerobic respiration, let's have a quick recap.
Is a really big deal. So many organisms, from fish to plants to humans, need oxygen. And yes, even though plants make oxygen in photosynthesis, they still perform cellular respiration, and therefore plants still need oxygen themselves. There's often a misconception that plants don't need oxygen. That's just not true. So why do these organisms need oxygen? It's similar to why you need oxygen. If you've ever wondered why you need to breathe, which is done by the respiratory system in your body, zoom into the cell level. Cells in your body use the oxygen you inhale to perform cellular respiration. The formula here requires inputs, otherwise known as reactants, to make ATP. And oxygen is one of those reactants in the overall equation that is needed to break glucose down in forming ATP. Why ATP? ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it's action-packed with 3 phosphates. It has the ability to power many cellular processes. Typically, it's coupled to other things that it may be powering. Now, after losing the phosphate, the molecule is ADP, adenosine diphosphate, because it has 2 phosphates. In cellular respiration, though, there are enzymes that can add another phosphate to it and convert it back into ATP again. This particular formula of cellular respiration is aerobic, meaning overall it requires oxygen. It's pretty complex, and we have a video breaking down the...
So, that was a quick recap in which we discussed that aerobic respiration requires oxygen for the breakdown of glucose into our very useful energy currency, which is known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Coming towards our today's topic, anaerobic respiration, and we will be discussing its types, which are 2. Anaerobic respiration, according to your book, its definition is the cellular respiration which occurs in the absence of oxygen is commonly termed as anaerobic respiration. So what exactly is happening in anaerobic respiration? It is glucose is incompletely oxidized. It means that it is not completely broken down into carbon dioxide and a lot of energy in the form of 36 ATPs. Hence, less amount of energy is released in the form of only 2 ATPs are produced in anaerobic respiration. The first step is very similar to aerobic respiration, in which glucose molecule is breaking down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. Like 6 molecules or 6 carbon compound glucose is broken down into 3 carbon compound pyruvic acid. As per this diagram shows anaerobic respiration, it occurs without oxygen, in the absence of oxygen, obviously. It is the breakdown of organic compound. This process is called glycolysis. In this glycolysis, what happens? Organic compound like glucose is breaking down into pyruvic acid molecule with release of small amount of energy or 2 ATPs. And by following anaerobic pathways, we will be producing lactic acid, ethyl alcohol, and ethyl alcohol as a product of breakdown of sugar. The first step in anaerobic respiration is similar to aerobic respiration, in which glucose molecule 3 carbon compound is breaking down into 2 pyruvate, 2 3 carbon compounds, and with the release of small amount of energy and 2 NADH molecules. There are also 2 NAD required and 2 ATP required for the process of glycolysis. So for understanding of glycolysis, we have to check in that video. Let's begin.
This process is called fermentation, and that's what we're going to focus on. Fermentation is a way to be able to handle the little to no oxygen issue. It allows for glycolysis to happen and for glycolysis to keep going. That means making ATP where there is no oxygen. And while you won't make as much ATP in this process as you would aerobic cellular respiration, you can't be too picky when oxygen isn't around. Okay, so recall what glycolysis is from our cellular respiration video. In glycolysis, you take glucose, a sugar, and it gets converted into pyruvate. This takes a little ATP cost to actually start it up, but overall, per glucose, you make 2 net ATP molecules, and you also produce 2 NADH.
So in the second step, what we are doing is that we are already done with this 6 carbon compound converted into pyruvate molecule with the release of 2 ATP. While the 4 ATP you see in the last slide, those 2 ATPs that are used for obviously this process of glycolysis. Hence we are left with these 2 ATP molecules from glycolysis. In fermentation or anaerobic respiration in animals and plants, in animals it happens in a way that lactic acid fermentation takes place and alcoholic fermentation takes place in plants. In case of animals, lactic acid fermentation, this name is due to the product of this fermentation, because in lactic acid fermentation we are producing lactic acid from our pyruvate, while in case of alcoholic fermentation we are producing ethyl alcohol from our reactant pyruvate from glycolysis. So only let's take a look at this note. Only glycolysis produce energy. You can see here the 2 ATP molecules are produced from here. No ATP or no energy is produced from either of these 2 fermentation. You can see here no ATP is producing, only ethyl alcohol, lactic acid and carbon dioxide is produced. Further, if we classify anaerobic respiration as the first step is this one, and second step this one. In first step, glucose is converted into pyruvate, 6 carbon compound is converted into 3 carbon compound, while in case of animals this pyruvate is converted into lactic acid. In case of yeast and other plants, this pyruvate is converted into carbon dioxide and ethanol or ethyl alcohol. So let's start with alcoholic fermentation. In alcoholic fermentation, what happens exactly? That yeast, it happens in yeast and some of the plants. In this case, what happens here, the yeast we add in our baking industry, in baking our cakes, it loves sugar. It utilizes this sugar and release what? It releases ethanol, it releases carbon dioxide and small amount of energy. So you can see here, yeast loves sugar, it eats sugar, and it is breaking down this sugar or this glucose into carbon dioxide and ethanol and small amount of energy. Like you can see here, these are some sugars in our food. The yeast is, this molecule is here, it is breaking down this sugar and digesting it and producing carbon dioxide, which is released up in the form of gas, and ethanol molecules, which is a liquid. Coming towards alcoholic fermentation, it produces carbon dioxide and ethanol. And in alcoholic fermentation, what we see exactly is that first we come to know about the alcoholic fermentation. The products are ethanol and carbon dioxide, and this alcoholic fermentation is used to make beer, bread and wine. In anaerobic respiration, what happens is that glucose is breaking down, and this is giving us pyruvate molecules, which are with the release of 2 ATP molecules, while the rest of the pyruvate is converted into lactate. And this type of fermentation is taking place in yeast and yogurt with the help of bacteria which are present in milk, while lactic acid fermentation is also happening in our muscles. Let's take a look at this video in order to understand the fermentation. And
welcome to Moo Math and Science. In this video, I'd like to talk about fermentation, also called anaerobic respiration. Sometimes cells need to produce energy whenever oxygen is not present. A solution to this is called fermentation, and it provides energy for cells without using oxygen. It is also called anaerobic respiration. It does produce energy, but it is less efficient than aerobic respiration that uses oxygen. There are 2 types of fermentation: alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. The first type I'd like to talk about, alcoholic fermentation, occurs in plants and yeast whenever oxygen is not present. The cell takes glucose, technically pyruvic acid, and it is converted into ethanol, which is a type of alcohol, and then some carbon dioxide and energy. This is how many wines and beer are created. The other type occurs in animals, including humans. What happens with this is you take glucose, again technically pyruvic acid, and it's converted into lactic acid plus energy. This occurs when the cell needs energy and there's just not enough oxygen. To get an idea of how inefficient fermentation is, during aerobic respiration, 36 ATPs are produced per glucose, and in fermentation, only 2 ATPs are produced. So there we go, two types of fermentation, alcoholic and lactic acid, but they're helpful because it helps to create energy when there's no oxygen around. Thanks for watching, and Moo Moo Math uploads a new math and science video every day.
So let's have a quick recap about our lesson today. It was about anaerobic respiration, and we studied two types of anaerobic respiration, which is also called as fermentation. It is alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. What happens in our aerobic respiration, glucose molecule, it is breaking down into pyruvate molecule with the help of this process of glycolysis. In anaerobic respiration, what happens in animal cell, lactic acid is produced, while in plant cell, ethanol and carbon dioxide are usually produced. So as a part of your assignment, you have to define and explain different types of anaerobic respirations and also write down their chemical equations, which are given in your books. So that was all for today's lesson. I hope you understand and enjoy today's lesson very much. So stay curious, stay healthy. That's all for today. Allah Hafiz.